Millstone was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Nestled in a valley surrounded by lush hills and dense forests, it seemed immune to the chaos of the outside world. The streets were lined with quaint shops and houses, and the town square, with its old clock tower, was the heart of the community. Residents gathered there for weekly farmers' markets, holiday celebrations, and town meetings. John Harris, a skilled carpenter, was well known and respected in Millstone. His craftsmanship was evident in the beautifully made furniture that adorned many of the homes in town. John was a quiet, unassuming man, devoted to his work and his family. He had married his high school sweetheart, Lisa, and together they had a young daughter, Emily, who was the light of their lives. John's days were filled with the steady rhythm of his work. He loved the feel of wood under his hands and took pride in creating pieces that would last for generations. Evenings were spent in the cozy warmth of their small home, where Lisa cooked hearty meals and Emily played with her toys. Their life was simple but happy, and John felt a deep sense of contentment. Sheriff Hank Thompson had been the law in Millstone for over 2 decades. With his broad shoulders and stern demeanor, he was both feared and respected. The townsfolk trusted him to keep the peace, and he had a reputation for being tough but fair. His niece, Rachel, was a bright, lively young woman, loved by all who knew her. She worked part-time at the local diner and had dreams of leaving Millstone for college in the big city. One evening, Rachel confided in John about her troubles with her boyfriend, Mike, a local mechanic with a temper. She felt safe talking to John, who listened with a sympathetic ear. John offered her advice and support, urging her to seek help if she ever felt threatened. A few days later, Rachel was found brutally murdered near the edge of town. The murder sent shockwaves through Millstone. Rachel's death was a tragedy that struck at the heart of the community. The peaceful facade of the town was shattered, replaced by fear and suspicion. Sheriff Thompson was under immense pressure to find the killer and restore order. He promised swift justice, vowing to leave no stone unturned in his search for Rachel's murderer. As the investigation began, the town buzzed with rumors and speculation. People whispered about possible suspects, and fingers were quickly pointed. John, who had been seen arguing with Rachel at the diner shortly before her death, found himself at the center of these suspicions. Despite his attempts to explain that he had been trying to help Rachel, the rumor mill painted a different picture. John's life began to unravel. Friends and neighbors who once greeted him warmly now looked at him with suspicion and fear. His woodworking business suffered as customers canceled orders and avoided his shop. Lisa tried to shield Emily from the growing hostility, but the tension was palpable. The close-knit community they had known and loved turned into a hostile environment, leaving John and his family isolated and vulnerable. Sheriff Thompson, desperate to close the case, focused his investigation on John. He convinced himself that John had a motive and, without concrete evidence, arrested him. The arrest was swift and public, with John being led away in handcuffs in front of his distraught family. The town, eager for closure, rallied behind the sheriff, believing that justice would soon be served. John's pleas of innocence fell on deaf ears. The same community that had once embraced him now shunned him, convinced of his guilt. As he sat in the town's small jail, John felt a deep sense of betrayal and helplessness. The peaceful life he had worked so hard to build was in ruins, and the nightmare was only beginning. John's arrest sent shockwaves through Millstone. The small, tightly knit community was eager for justice, and many were quick to believe that the sheriff had arrested the right man. Rachel's murder had left the town in a state of fear and anger, and John became the unfortunate scapegoat. However, beneath the surface of this tranquil town lay a legal system tainted by corruption and favoritism, elements that would seal John's fate. Sheriff Hank Thompson, though outwardly respected, had a darker side known to a select few. His tenure as sheriff had been marked by a number of questionable decisions and dubious alliances. He had ties with some of the town's influential figures who ensured his continued authority in exchange for favors and leniency. Rachel's murder presented an opportunity for the sheriff to demonstrate his effectiveness and restore his faltering image. From the moment John was arrested, the process was anything but fair. The sheriff, desperate to solve the case quickly, pressured witnesses and manipulated evidence to build a case against John. Statements were coerced, and those who might have supported John's innocence were subtly intimidated or ignored. Evidence that could have exonerated John was conveniently overlooked or dismissed. John was assigned a public defender, Harold Jenkins, an overworked and underpaid lawyer who had little time to devote to his case. Harold had a reputation for taking the path of least resistance, often advising his clients to take plea deals to avoid lengthy trials. John, however, insisted on his innocence and refused to accept any deal that would imply guilt. The trial was a spectacle from the beginning. The prosecution, led by the ambitious district attorney Paul Radford, presented a damning case against John. Radford was known for his ruthless pursuit of convictions and had his eyes set on a higher political office. A high-profile case like Rachel's murder was the perfect stepping stone for his career. The evidence against John was largely circumstantial, but the prosecution spun a narrative that painted John as a jealous and vengeful man. They highlighted his conversation with Rachel at the diner, twisting it into a heated argument rather than the supportive talk it had been. Witnesses were brought forward who claimed to have seen John near the crime scene, though their testimonies were inconsistent and unreliable. Harold Jenkins struggled to mount an effective defense. He lacked the resources and support needed to challenge the prosecution's case. Key evidence that could have proven John's innocence, such as Mike's violent history and Rachel's fear of him, was not pursued or presented. The jury, comprised of townsfolk influenced by the pervasive rumors and the sheriff's authority, was predisposed to believe in John's guilt. Throughout the trial, John remained steadfast in his claims of innocence. He recounted his conversation with Rachel, explaining how she had confided in him about her fears regarding Mike. He detailed his whereabouts on the night of the murder, providing an alibi that was corroborated by his wife, Lisa. However, his words carried little weight against the orchestrated narrative of the prosecution. Lisa and Emily attended every day of the trial, their presence a stark reminder of the personal stakes involved. Lisa tried to remain strong for their daughter, but the strain was evident. Emily, too young to fully understand the proceedings, sensed the tension and fear surrounding her family. The small courtroom buzzed with the murmurs of spectators, their collective judgment adding to the oppressive atmosphere. As the trial neared its conclusion, the outcome seemed inevitable. The jury, swayed by the prosecution's impassioned arguments and the sheriff's looming presence, found John guilty of Rachel's murder. The judge, known for his harsh sentencing, handed down the death penalty. John's fate was sealed, his life now in the hands of a system that had failed him at every turn. In the days following the verdict, the town of Millstone returned to a semblance of normalcy. The sense of fear and uncertainty that had gripped the community began to dissipate, replaced by a false sense of justice. Sheriff Thompson and District Attorney Radford were lauded as heroes, their reputations bolstered by the conviction. Yet beneath the surface, the true criminal remained free, and an innocent man's life hung in the balance. John, now confined to death row, faced a grim reality. The betrayal by his community, the corruption of the legal system, and the impending execution weighed heavily on his mind. He continued to proclaim his innocence, but his voice was drowned out by the machinery of a justice system more concerned with appearances than the truth. As the days passed, the hope that had once sustained him began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of despair. Locked away in a bleak cell on death row, John Parker's sense of despair grew with each passing day. The cold, gray walls seemed to close in on him, a constant reminder of his impending execution. However, despite the overwhelming odds, John refused to surrender to the unjust fate that had been imposed upon him. His thoughts were consumed by one singular objective: proving his innocence and reclaiming his life for the sake of his family. Lisa Parker, John's devoted wife, shared his determination. She embarked on a relentless quest to uncover any piece of evidence that might exonerate her husband. Lisa's days were spent poring over case files, re-interviewing witnesses, and contacting anyone who might have information about Rachel's murder. Despite facing the cold shoulders of many townspeople and the intimidation tactics of Sheriff Thompson's deputies, Lisa's resolve remained unshaken. Lisa's first breakthrough came when she managed to locate Sarah Johnson, a former waitress at the diner where John had spoken with Rachel on the night of her murder. Sarah had moved out of Millstone shortly after the incident, partly due to the fear and suspicion that had enveloped the town. Lisa found her living in a small town several miles away. Sarah was initially reluctant to talk, but Lisa's sincerity and desperation eventually persuaded her. Sarah revealed that she had overheard parts of John and Rachel's conversation that night. Contrary to the prosecution's narrative, their discussion had been calm and supportive. Rachel had confided in John about her fear of Mike, expressing her concern for her safety. Sarah's testimony, however, had never been sought by the defense, and she had not come forward out of fear of reprisal from the sheriff's office. Buoyed by this new information, Lisa approached Harold Jenkins with Sarah's statement. Harold, though initially hesitant, recognized the potential significance of this testimony. He agreed to file a motion for a retrial based on newly discovered evidence. However, the request was swiftly denied by the judge, who maintained that the evidence was not substantial enough to warrant a new trial. The legal system's bias against John was starkly evident once again. Undeterred, Lisa sought the assistance of a private investigator, Tom Harris, who had a reputation for taking on challenging cases. Tom was moved by Lisa's dedication and John's plight, agreeing to work pro bono. His investigation uncovered several discrepancies and leads that had been ignored by the initial investigation. Tom discovered that Mike, Rachel's abusive boyfriend, had a history of violence and had been seen arguing with Rachel just days before her murder. Tom also found evidence suggesting that Sheriff Thompson had deliberately overlooked Mike's potential involvement in the crime. There were reports and complaints against Mike that had mysteriously disappeared from the police records. It became increasingly clear that the sheriff had orchestrated a cover-up to protect Mike, possibly due to some undisclosed connection or leverage. With these findings, Lisa and Tom approached the state's attorney general's office, hoping to bypass the corrupt local authorities. They submitted a comprehensive report detailing the evidence of John's innocence and the corruption within Millstone's legal system. The Attorney General agreed to review the case, and an independent investigator, Laura Mitchell, was assigned to re-examine the evidence. As Laura delved into the case, she uncovered more irregularities and evidence of misconduct by Sheriff Thompson and his deputies. However, progress was slow, and the looming execution date cast a dark shadow over their efforts. John's health deteriorated under the constant stress and poor conditions of death row, but he clung to the faint glimmer of hope that Lisa's relentless fight might save him. Despite their best efforts, the clock was ticking. The legal battles, appeals, and procedural hurdles seemed insurmountable. Each setback took a toll on Lisa and John, yet they remained steadfast. The weight of the town's collective judgment and the corruption that had ensnared them felt almost too great to overcome. In a last-ditch effort, Lisa and Tom held a press conference, revealing their findings to the public. They hoped to garner enough media attention to pressure the judicial system into granting John a stay of execution and a fair retrial. The story gained traction, and soon national news outlets began to cover the case. Public opinion began to shift, with many expressing outrage over the apparent miscarriage of justice. However, time was not on their side. Despite the growing public support and the mounting evidence of his innocence, John's execution date approached rapidly. The bureaucratic wheels of justice turned too slowly to stop the impending tragedy. Lisa and John's supporters watched in helpless despair as the day of execution arrived, knowing that the truth they had fought so hard to uncover might never set John free. As John faced his final moments, he took solace in the knowledge that Lisa had never given up on him. The injustice of his situation weighed heavily on him, but he hoped that their efforts might at least expose the corruption and prevent others from suffering the same fate. The true criminal remained free, and the small town of Millstone would have to reckon with the consequences of its blind pursuit of justice. The day of John Parker's execution dawned with an eerie calmness, a deceptive tranquility that belied the storm of emotions raging within those who believed in his innocence. The prison grounds were somber, draped in a heavy silence as the staff prepared for the grim event. John's cell, his home for the past months, was suffused with a palpable tension. He sat on the edge of his bunk, hands clasped together, eyes staring into the void. The weight of his impending fate bore down on him, a cruel reminder of the injustice he had fought so desperately to escape. Outside the prison, a small group of protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for John," and "Stop the execution." Among them stood Lisa Parker, her face etched with exhaustion and determination. She had not slept the night before, instead, spending the hours making desperate phone calls, pleading with anyone who might have the power to intervene. The media presence had grown, reporters and cameras capturing the unfolding drama, amplifying the cries for justice. Inside, John was granted a final visit with Lisa. They sat across from each other, separated by a pane of glass, their hands pressed against the cold surface. Lisa's eyes were red-rimmed, her voice hoarse from days of pleading and shouting for justice. John tried to offer her a reassuring smile, though it faltered under the weight of their shared despair. They spoke of their love, their memories, and the dreams that had been shattered by this nightmare. John's resolve to face his fate with dignity strengthened as he looked into Lisa's eyes, seeing the unwavering support and love that had fueled their fight. Meanwhile, Laura Mitchell, the independent investigator from the Attorney General's office, was racing against time. Her re-examination of the case had revealed undeniable evidence of corruption and misconduct. Sheriff Thompson's ties to Mike, Rachel's abusive boyfriend, were now clear. Laura had found witnesses willing to testify about Mike's violent tendencies and Thompson's efforts to protect him. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, the wheels of justice turned too slowly. Laura managed to secure a meeting with the governor's office, hoping to present the new findings and halt the execution. The governor, aware of the growing public outcry, agreed to review the evidence. As Laura laid out the case, emphasizing the corruption and the real possibility of John's innocence, the governor listened intently. However, bureaucracy and legal protocols hampered the process. Time was running out, and Laura's pleas for immediate action were met with frustrating delays. Back at the prison, the final preparations were underway. John was led to the execution chamber, a cold, sterile room that seemed to embody the heartlessness of the legal system that had condemned him. He walked with a steady gait, his expression calm, though his heart raced with a mix of fear and resignation. The witnesses, including media representatives and selected individuals, took their places behind a glass partition, watching as John was strapped to the gurney. The executioner moved with practiced efficiency, attaching the necessary IV lines. John's mind raced with thoughts of Lisa, his children, and the life he had been robbed of. He focused on Lisa's face, her final words of love and encouragement echoing in his mind. As the lethal injection began, John felt a coldness creeping through his veins. He closed his eyes, whispering a silent goodbye to his family. Just as the first chemicals began to flow, a commotion erupted outside the execution chamber. Laura burst through the doors, flanked by prison officials and armed with a last-minute stay of execution from the governor. The room fell into chaos as the order was relayed to the executioner, but it was too late. The drugs had already taken effect, and John's life slipped away despite the desperate efforts to halt the process. The aftermath was a whirlwind of media coverage and public outrage. Laura and Lisa, devastated by the failure to save John, directed their energy toward exposing the corruption that had led to his wrongful conviction. Sheriff Thompson and his deputies were placed under investigation, their roles in the cover-up laid bare. Mike, the true perpetrator, was finally arrested, though the justice served came too late for John. The town of Millstone was left to grapple with the fallout of its blind pursuit of justice. The legal system, exposed as flawed and corrupt, faced widespread condemnation. For Lisa, the pain of losing John was a wound that would never heal. She channeled her grief into advocacy, fighting for reforms to prevent such a miscarriage of justice from happening again. John Parker's death became a catalyst for change, a tragic reminder of the price of corruption and the urgent need for a fair and just legal system. In the wake of John Parker's execution, the small town of Millstone was forever altered. The immediate aftermath was marked by a groundswell of public outrage and grief. John's funeral was a somber affair, attended by family, friends, and supporters who had come to see him as a symbol of tragic injustice. Lisa Parker stood at the graveside, clutching the hands of their children as tears streamed down her face. The community's mourning was profound, a stark acknowledgement of the systemic failures that had led to John's death. The investigation into Sheriff Thompson and his deputies proceeded with an intensity fueled by public demand for accountability. Laura Mitchell, undeterred by the tragic outcome, threw herself into the case with renewed vigor. She meticulously gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the full extent of the corruption. The media kept a close watch, ensuring that the public remained informed and engaged. Sheriff Thompson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of obstruction of justice, perjury, and conspiracy. The trial was a high-profile event, drawing national attention. As details of the corruption were laid bare in court, the depth of the betrayal felt by the community became evident. Witnesses testified about the sheriff's manipulation of evidence and his collusion with Mike, the true criminal. The jury's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Guilty on all counts. Thompson was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, a stark reversal of his once powerful position. Mike, Rachel's abusive boyfriend, also faced justice. His arrest and subsequent trial for her murder brought a measure of closure to her grieving family. They had lived with the weight of unresolved questions and the pain of losing Rachel, compounded by the wrongful conviction of John Parker. Mike's conviction was a small but significant step toward healing for them, though the scars of the ordeal would never fully fade. With Thompson and Mike behind bars, the focus shifted to reforming Millstone's legal system. Lisa Parker became a vocal advocate for justice reform, partnering with Laura Mitchell and other activists. They launched a campaign to address the systemic issues that had allowed such a miscarriage of justice to occur. Their efforts included pushing for the establishment of an independent review board to oversee cases of potential wrongful convictions, advocating for better legal representation for the accused, and calling for increased transparency and accountability within law enforcement. Lisa's advocacy work gained traction, attracting support from legal experts, community leaders, and even some politicians. They organized town hall meetings, educational forums, and marches to raise awareness and build momentum for change. Lisa's personal story resonated deeply with many, transforming her into a powerful symbol of the fight against injustice. The state government, under pressure from the public and media, initiated a comprehensive review of the judicial system. Recommendations for reforms were implemented, including mandatory body cameras for police officers, stricter regulations on evidence handling, and improved training programs to address implicit biases and ensure fair treatment for all. In the years following John's execution, Millstone slowly began to heal. The legal reforms brought about by Lisa and her supporters led to tangible improvements in the justice system. While the pain of losing John never left his family, their efforts to prevent others from suffering the same fate became a source of strength and purpose. Lisa continued her advocacy work, speaking at conferences, writing articles, and mentoring other families who had experienced wrongful convictions. Her tireless dedication helped to keep the conversation about justice reform alive and brought about lasting changes that honored John's memory. The legacy of John Parker, an innocent man who was tragically executed, became a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance, integrity, and compassion within the legal system. His story was taught in law schools, used as a case study in criminal justice courses, and remembered by those who fought to ensure that no one else would have to endure what he did. Millstone, though forever marked by the injustice it once allowed, became a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of community-driven change.